So tonight, as Andrew said, we're going to have a look at this subject of prophecy. Now, I've had the privilege of being able to do seminars and series of presentations over time. And we always have encouraged people who have come along, participants in the seminar series, to ask questions and to also ask what other subjects we would like to cover. And invariably, the subject of prophecy would come up. Prophecy is one of those things that holds people's attention. And even today, the knowledge or the experience of somebody telling you something that is going to come to pass in the future is, for most people, nothing short of magic. And it's a bit like that. And so tonight we want to explore this idea of prophecy. But first of all, we want to take some of the mystique out of this concept of prophecy. And we want to ask the question, well, let's just take a step back and put the idea of looking at the Bible to one side for a short moment and just ask the question, well, what does this word prophecy actually mean? What are we talking about? Are we talking about dark arts? Are we talking about black magic? Or are we talking about something much more simpler than that? And of course, the answer is it's much simpler than that. The word prophecy, if we look up on an online dictionary, simply means a prediction of what will happen in the future. So if I predict to you that, some of you tonight are going to have supper before you go to bed, that's a prophecy, because it's telling you something that hasn't come to pass, but probably will happen in the near future. And we use prophecy every day in reality, and that's why I've got that picture on the screen. We use it for weather. Every weather forecast is a prophecy. Some come to pass, and in Melbourne it seems to vary quite drastically. But in essence, the weather forecast is a prophecy about what's going to happen tomorrow, the next day, the day after. That is a prophecy. So when we use this word prophecy, it's not some sort of dark magic. It's not some sort of, looking at tea leaves in the bottom of a cup. It's actually using often logical events that or things like that to summarize what we think is going to happen in the near future. And that's precisely what we're going to look at tonight. But we're going to see that the Bible uses this concept of prophecy extensively, and it uses it for one particular reason, and that is it gives us hope. Because the Bible is extensively uses this concept. I just heard somebody talking. I assume everything's okay. I'll continue on. So we want to therefore explore this idea a little bit and ask the question why we're going to spend time looking at this, as we've already indicated. And as I said, prophecy is an important Bible tool. In fact, it's a significant Bible tool, because a significant portion of the Bible was actually prophetic either at the time or is still prophetic at the moment. So here's a passage that Hugh Ross wrote back in 2003. And in describing the Bible, he says that unique among all books ever written, the Bible accurately foretells specific events in detail, many years, sometimes centuries, before they occur. Approximately 2,500 prophecies appear in the pages of the Bible, about 2,000 of which have already been fulfilled to the letter, no errors. So that gives you a little glimpse into when we talk about prophecy in the Bible, and we call it a Bible tool, it's a significant Bible tool. It gives us a great deal of assurance when we have a look at the Bible itself and why we spend time looking at the Bible. Now, when we talk about why we would spend time looking at the Bible, there's a number of different tools we would use. Consistency in the Bible and how the Bible was brought to being and the writers of the Bible, but prophecy would be one of the key tools to give us confidence that the Bible is something that we can rely on. And as that quote indicated, there are many fulfilled Bible prophecies that we can go back and have a look at. Many of them happened many years ago and have been fulfilled, and some, and we're going to look at a couple tonight, that have already been fulfilled, and that gives us confidence. And it gives us confidence that the ones that haven't been fulfilled will be fulfilled. And that's really where we're going to conclude tonight. So it gives us confidence that the Bible is what it claims to be, and that it claims to be the Word of God, and we can demonstrate or gives ourselves confidence that that is in fact the case. And as I indicated earlier on, the prophecies actually include us, and that's the ones that we're particularly chosen tonight. That's where it's going to really end tonight for us, because it's going to ask us a question, which we'll get to later on. So that's why it becomes important for us to spend evenings like this, to talk about what the Bible tells us, to have a look at how that can benefit us in these days. So tonight we're looking at prophecies, and the subject is prophecies that have been fulfilled in your lifetime or our lifetime. So obviously we've got to sort of set some sort of a bar there, and let's assume in the last 100 years. Let's have a look at those sort of concepts and ideas, and what sort of happened over the last 100 years. Well, of course, there's been many events and significant events that have happened over those 100 years. I mean, you think we've had 2 world wars. There's been the Great Depression. We've had, Nazi Germany come, which we'll be talking a little bit about tonight. The Cold War, the Industrial Revolution, the growth in the wealth of the Western world. There's also been all sorts of significant things that have happened. But the one we want to focus on tonight is the subject of Israel. And the prophecies that have, a couple of prophecies that have specifically focused on Israel. And the reason for that is because Israel is the focus of the Bible. And we're not going to obviously deal with why that's the case tonight. That's a subject or multiple nights on its own. But Israel is the focus of the Bible. So if we're going to have a look at some prophecies that have been fulfilled in our lifetime, looking at prophecies concerning Israel is a significant thing to look at, because that's what God is concerned with in the Bible. This small nation of Israel that, as many people say, they have almost an exponential effect on the rest of the world as compared to their size. This tiny slither of land in the Middle East, that's occupied by a few million people, seems to hold the attention of the world. And if something happens in Israel, the rest of the world takes notice. The rest of the world sits up and listens and looks at what's going on in that little land. And so the question, of course, becomes why. And hopefully tonight we'll see that and answer a little bit of that question for ourselves tonight. So we want to look, as we said, at 2 specific prophecies about Israel. And we're going to, and there's a number of reasons why we've chosen these 2 prophecies. The first one, obviously, being that it's about Israel, God's people. But the second reason, and perhaps one of another key reason, is that they actually interpret themselves. We can have a look at these prophecies that, in some case, the first case was given, 2,500 years ago or thereabouts. And yet it's only come to fruition in our lifetime. It's been fulfilled in the days of some of us that are watching this evening. That's the amazing thing about these sort of prophecies, and particularly the ones we're going to look at tonight. So we're going to focus on 2 prophecies. The first one that deals with Israel as a nation itself. So Israel as a complete nation, as a people, and what happened to them. And we're going to see the second one concerning specifically Jerusalem being the capital city, as we see today, of the nation of Israel. So we want to focus on these two prophecies tonight. And we're going to, and that'll definitely fill in our time tonight, just dealing with these 2 prophecies alone. So the first one is looking at the chapter that we had, or portion of the chapter that we had read tonight. We only had half the chapter read. We had the first section that deals with a very specific vision that was given to a man called Ezekiel. And as we read there tonight, you would have noticed that it's talking about a valley that was full of dry bones. Ezekiel was given this vision, and we say vision because it's obviously not a literal thing that he saw. We're told that in verse 1, as we'll see that in a moment. So he's given a vision about this valley, and it's full of dry bones. And obviously that tells us a little bit and gives us a hint at what we're talking about here. We're talking about many people that have once lived and have now unfortunately perished, and their bones are left in this dry valley. So this man Ezekiel, this prophet of God recorded in the Bible, was given this vision. As I said, it's recorded about 500 or 600 years before the Lord Jesus Christ was born. So we're talking, 2,500, 2,600 years ago that this prophecy was given. So we're talking a long time ago that this vision was, or this prophecy was recorded by this man Ezekiel. Now, Ezekiel was a Jew. He was a man that had been living in Israel, but the nation, the empire of Babylon had come down and conquered the nation of Israel and had taken them away out of the land of Israel that we know today, and they were living in Babylon, the land of the empire of Babylon. Today, if you're looking for that on a map, you wouldn't find Babylon, but you would find the same area, which is modern-day Iraq. So that's where the prophecy of Ezekiel was revealed to him while he was living in Babylon, as we said, about 2,500 years ago. So he receives, as we said, this vision about this valley full of bones. And so let's just have a look at some words in Ezekiel chapter 37, because we want to see what it tells us, because it's a very interesting chapter. So verse 1, the hand of the Lord, that Andrew's already read for us, but let's just recap what he's read for us. The hand of the Lord was upon me, and he carried me out in the spirit of the Lord, and he set me down in the midst of the valley, which was full of bones. So this phrase, in the spirit, is telling us that this was not reality. This was not an actual valley of dry bones. It was a vision. So the hand of God was upon Ezekiel, and he took him in spirit and gave him this vision of a valley of dry bones. So it's a parable, as it were. It's a prophecy given in a parable form about people that have suffered some terrible event, as we can tell from the picture there. And it says that he caused me to. So God caused Ezekiel to pass by them, to notice these bones, and there were very many in the open valley, and lo, they were very dry. So there was a lot of people. They've unfortunately perished, and they were very dry. They were well and truly dead people. They were. There was no life in these bodies at all. They were just dry bones in the valley. And so God says to Ezekiel, "Son of man, can these bones live?" And of course, that's a question that we wouldn't want to ask of us. I mean, obviously, the answer to us would be no. And Ezekiel sort of knows that this is not quite a trick question, but a question that only God can answer. So he says, "Oh, Lord God, you know the answer to that. Only you know that answer." And so God says to Ezekiel, he says to again unto me, "Prophesy upon these bones, and say unto them, O ye dry bones, hear the word of the Lord." So God speaks to Ezekiel, and he says, "I want you to give a prophecy concerning these dry bones." So obviously we can see why we're looking at this tonight. So it's a prophecy that was given about these dry bones, that God was going to do something with them, clearly. So he tells Ezekiel to speak to these about these dry bones. And God says in verse 5, he continues on, and the Lord God says to Ezekiel to say to these bones, "Behold, I will cause breath to enter into you, and ye shall live." So we can start to see, okay, well, we've got some indication now about what this prophecy is going to be about. So we've got a lot of dead people in the valley, people that have previously obviously existed, they've perished, and now God says, well, actually, the people who these bones represent are going to live once again. They're going to, in effect, be resurrected. That's what's going to happen to these bones. These people are going to be resurrected. So, an interesting vision that's given to Ezekiel. So let's just summarize what we've seen. So we've seen dry bones, which equals obviously dead people. There's no chance from a natural viewpoint that these bones could of themselves regain life. But God says that he was going to intervene in with these bones, and that these bones were going to be resurrected. They were going to live again. And of course, the question then, well, who is the vision speaking about? And obviously, I've given the clue away with the flag on the screen. Who is this vision speaking about? Well, the chapter, as we said earlier on, the chapter interprets itself for us. The chapter actually gives us the answer. God tells us through the words of Ezekiel who and what he is speaking about. So let's come down to verse 11 in that chapter. We read on in verse 11. Then God says unto me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, our bones are dried, our hope is lost, we are cut off for our parts. So the vision is about the nation of Israel. So clearly what the vision is about is that the nation of Israel was going to go through a period of time where they were like dry bones. They were in effect dead. The nation would not exist. There was no hope in the natural course of things that this nation would ever exist again. And their summary was, our hope is lost. We are cut off for our parts. We're not going to exist again. So what that verse is telling us is some very important information, because it's telling us that the Jewish people would still be in existence. They just wouldn't be in existence as a nation. Otherwise, they couldn't say, our bones are dried, our hope is lost. So this verse is telling us quite a good deal of information that about Israel. Let's move on though. Next verse 12. God says, therefore prophesy. This is the prophecy, Ezekiel, that I want you to give to these bones. I want you to say to them, thus saith the Lord God, behold, O my people, I will open your graves, I will cause you to come up out of your graves, and I will bring you into the land of Israel. So it's becoming quite specific, isn't it, about what this vision is about. And then he goes on in verse 13, and he goes, I'm going to bring you back from the dead. I'm going to resurrect you, for want of a better phrase. And the reason I'm going to do that, verse 13, you shall know that I am the Lord when I have opened your graves, O my people, and brought you up out of your graves. So God says there's a reason why I'm doing this. I want you to realize who I am, that I am your God and that you are my people. Verse 14, he concludes that vision or that prophecy by saying, and I will put my spirit in you, ye shall live, and I shall place you in your own land. Then you shall know that I, the Lord, have spoken it and performed it, saith the Lord. So that's the prophecy that Ezekiel is given to speak about these bones and what was going to happen. And as we can see, it's a prophecy concerning the nation of Israel. So, of course, we want to then start asking, well, let's analyze this a little bit, and let's just summarize what things were going to happen in this prophecy. What things were going to happen, and then obviously we're going to ask the question, well, did they happen? So what things were going to happen? So it's obviously talking about Israel. So in the vision, these things has to happen. So Israel has to be like they are dead. And we obviously emphasized in verse 11 that the nation would be dead. They would be without hope. They were cut off from their people. They did not exist. They would appear like there is no hope whatsoever that the nation of Israel would exist again. God then says that he would open their graves. He would bring them back to life. He would resurrect them. He would intervene in the history of their nation and would change the course of their nation. And he says, I would cause them to come up out of your graves, and then I would bring you into the land. So what he's saying is that I will do this in stages. I'm not just going to snap my fingers and you're going to be standing upright on your feet once again. I'm going to do this in stages. I'm going to open your graves. I'm going to cause you to come up. And actually, if we had read if you've still got your Bibles open, you'll notice in verse 6 that it actually goes into detail. And verse 6 actually says that I'm going to put sinews upon you. I'm going to bring up the flesh upon you. I'm going to cover you with skin, and then I'm going to breathe into you. So it's not just going to be an instantaneous change from being dead bones into standing upon your feet. It's going to happen in stages. It's going to happen gradually. And I'm going to bring you back from being a dead nation, and I'm going to cause you to be a living nation once again. And importantly, not only that, but it would be that you would be brought back into your own land, the land of Israel. So as you can see, very specific prophecy concerning what would happen to Israel and how the changes they would go through in their existence as a nation. So that's the vision. So, of course, now we want to look at, well, how was this vision fulfilled? So what we want to do is we'll put those points back up on the screen, and then we'll go through each one of them and say, okay, what happened to the nation of Israel? So the first one is that they were obviously dead. They were going to be without hope. And what we find is the history of Israel. We know that from history, the Lord Jesus Christ obviously existed as in the land of Israel while Israel was a nation. And that was 500 years after the time of Ezekiel. So the prophecy that Ezekiel was going to give to, or was given concerning these bones, wasn't going to start to come to pass until at least the Lord Jesus Christ lived on the earth and died and ascended into heaven, as we're told in the gospel records in the New Testament and the Acts of the Apostles. And what we find is that about 40 years after the Lord Jesus Christ, they were actually dead. And what happened is the Roman Empire came down in the year 70, so AD 70, particularly against the city of Jerusalem. And they came down and they besieged the city of Jerusalem for 3 years. And eventually they took the city, and Israel was scattered to the nations throughout the world. And the Israel as a nation was dead. It existed no longer. Their temple was destroyed. The city was destroyed. A significant portion of the people were destroyed. And Israel as a nation ceased to exist from AD 70, or around about from between AD 70 and about AD 130 was the final stages of the decimation of the nation of Israel. So AD 70 was Jerusalem, which was really the symbol of their death, because that's when their temple was destroyed. And that really symbolized the end of their official existence as a nation, although it didn't happen for another 30 or 40 years or so afterwards. So they were dead. They were scattered through the earth at that stage. And that's why we find Jewish people particularly scattered through Europe and into America. They were scattered by the Roman Empire at that time. And that's why they're found in the four corners of the world, to coin a phrase. So they were dead now for about 1900 years, as we're going to see tonight. So that prophecy was fulfilled in that regard for about 1900 years. And then the prophecy tells us that God is going to bring them back to life. And we can see that today. Obviously, there's a nation of Israel today. So they've gone from being a dead nation to now being a nation in existence. They've been resurrected as a nation. And not only that, but this nationhood would come in stages. And that's exactly what happened. We just want to explore this for a little bit to see that this is exactly what happened. That the prophecy of God was that they wouldn't just all of a sudden be a nation once again. It would happen in stages. The first stage was happened in the late 1800s by a man particularly who started the process called Theodor Herzl. Now, this man, Theodor Herzl, was a Jewish man who was born in Austria in about 1860, so the late 1800s, and died in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So he was a Jewish man that saw the need for the Jews to have a nation, to have a homeland. And so he founded what became known as Zionism. And he founded Zionism as a political tool. And he did it specifically as opposed to Judaism, which is the religion of the Jewish people. He recognized that for the Jews to have a nation, they wouldn't get international recognition if it was on the basis of their religion. It had to be a political basis. And so he recognized this, and so he started this group called Zion, which was the Zionist movement, Zionism, and he recognized this need for a Jewish homeland. And his aim was to have a home, a land for the Jewish people to live in once again. And he recognized that was a desperate need for the people. And so when the group got together, ideally, they said, we would like the homeland to be Palestine, what was then known as Palestine, because that was their original homeland. That's where they had lived for many, many centuries, in that land. So that was ideally the place where they were going to live. However, Theodor Herzl wasn't sold on the idea of Palestine necessarily being the deal breaker. He was happy for anywhere for the Jewish people to go and live. And in fact, he was offered, he would have accepted the nation of Uganda, or the land of what we know as Uganda today, if he hadn't actually passed away. And what we see from history is that this man was a stepping stone in bringing Israel back to life. And what he did was he started the ball rolling, as it were, on establishing a Jewish nation again. So he was the driving force in getting Zionism as a political body established and operating. And so in 1897, he held the first Jewish World Conference in Basel in Switzerland. And that was the first time that the Jews from around the world got together, and there was about 120 representatives at that conference in Switzerland in 1897, where they got together and they spoke about this issue of a Jewish homeland, and obviously they debated where it would be and all that sort of things. And he made this comment, we're told, in his diary at that time, or just shortly after that conference. And he said, if I had to sum up the Basel Congress in one word, which I shall not do openly, it would be this: at Basel, I founded the Jewish state. If I were to say this today, I would be greeted by universal laughter, because Israel was as a nation was, of course, dead. But in 5 years, perhaps, and certainly in 50, everyone will see it. And he wrote that in 1897. And while he was not a divinely inspired prophet, his words came to pass exactly as he said there. 50 years later, there was a nation of Israel once again, as we're going to see in a moment. We're not claiming that he was divinely inspired or anything like that, but he could see that there was a great need for a Jewish nation, and that's exactly what came to pass. So Theodor Herzl was one of those stepping stones in the bringing the nation of Israel back to life in stages. It was carried on by the British Empire themselves. And what we find is that there was a man called Lord Balfour who was instrumental in writing a declaration, which we want to have a look at now, because that was perhaps the next major stepping stone in bringing the nation of Israel back to life again. Now, just a brief summary of what was happening in the world political stage at that time, particularly in Britain and with the Jewish people. So 1897 was the conference in Switzerland. So we now move right along to about 1914 or so to 15, when the First World War was well underway. And what we find is that Zionism actually gathered pace under a man. That's the picture there of a man by the name of Chaim Weizmann. And he was the leader of Zionism after Theodor Herzl. And he was a driving force in getting the Zionists recognised politically, particularly in Britain. And we find that Britain was actually saw a need to actually support the idea of Zionism, and particularly a Palestinian home for the Jewish people. And there was a couple of reasons why they saw the need for that. The first one was that, of course, at the end or towards the end of the First World War, Russia had already made a pact or a peace pact with Germany, and they were starting to pull out of the war. And Britain saw that they needed Russia to stay in the war if they were going to win. And it turns out that Russia still made that peace pact with Germany and left the war. But Britain saw that the Jewish people were going to be instrumental in influencing the Russian nation to remain in the war. And so Britain spoke to the Jewish leaders in Britain and requested that they speak with their Jewish counterparts in Russia and try to influence Russia's influence or participation in the war. It turns out that obviously that they didn't need it in the end with Russia leaving. So there was that issue, and then there was also the issue of political stability. So they realised that after the war, Palestine was one of those key elements in world affairs. Palestine occupies a remarkable position in where they are located, and that is they're the gateway between the Africas, the Asia, and of course the East, particularly with India. And so Britain saw that if they were going to continue their trading routes through that area, Palestine was going to be a key part in those efforts. And so they realised that they needed to keep Palestine stable after the war. And so they realised that they needed to perhaps support this Zionist movement a little bit more than what they had been doing. And Chaim Weizmann was instrumental in influencing these things behind the scene. Now, when those in the political realm realised what was going on, anti-Semitism started to rise, and they actually started to oppose the British leanings towards the Jewish people. And so they started to push back. And in the end, Britain realised that they actually needed to document something. And so what we find was that in 1917, a man called, or by the name of Lord Arthur Balfour, actually wrote this letter and documented the British position in regards to Palestine. And this is the letter that he sent to a gentleman by the name of Baron Rothschild. And this is a facsimile of the actual letter that was sent. And I'll just read it out to you because it's very interesting. So it's dated November the 2nd, 1917, so the end of the First World War. And he says, "Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with the Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. And they say, His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation." So what became known as the Balfour Declaration, which is what that letter represented, was the British Empire putting their stamp of approval on the Jews occupying Palestine or going back to Palestine and making Palestine their homeland once again. Now that document becomes very important in the history of Israel, and we're going to see that document continues to play a pivotal part as we move forward in history. So God says that the nation of Israel would come back in stages. So Theodore Herzl was a stepping stone. The British Empire, particularly Lord Balfour, was a stepping stone. The next major stepping stone in this establishing Israel in stages was what became known as the British Mandate over Palestine. So, of course, come the end of the First World War, they have to, or there's all the peace treaties and the peace conferences that are held to try and work their way through the decimation that was the result of the war. And there was, of course, a lot of antagonism towards Germany. And so there's a lot of conferences that happen, and particularly the nations of Britain, France, and Italy come together, and they, of course, hold Germany responsible for what happened in the First World War. And they actually made Germany pay a significant price financially to repair the damage that they had done. And the whole intent of that was to keep basically Germany financially broke so that they wouldn't be able to establish an army again. We know how well that worked out with the Second World War occurring, only a few decades later. But that was their intention, to put a stop to Germany making a move on becoming a significant world power again. So part of those discussions resulted in this idea that Britain would look after Palestine. And so what came out of those discussions was two things. First of all, there was a group called the League of Nations that were established. So these nations came together and said, well, actually, we need this group to continue on to keep the peace on an international level. Now, the League of Nations didn't last very long. They didn't achieve much. And they became known as United Nations shortly after the Second World War. So that's where the whole concept of United Nations began, was this group called the League of Nations, which was established post-World War One. So once again, they had these conferences. They got together and they spoke about things that were going on, and the British mandate for over Palestine came as a result of the discussions that were held with those nations. And what happened was that, of course, the Balfour Declaration played a key element in that. So because Britain has already issued this Balfour Declaration, it was the other nations were happy for Britain to basically keep control over the area. And so they gave what's known as the British Mandate for Palestine. And this is the land on this map here that they specifically gave to Britain to administer. And it's, as you can see there, it's about 120,000 square kilometres. And it extends well beyond what we know as the borders of Israel today, and it includes Jordan and up into Iraq and Saudi Arabia. So that was the area that was given under or allocated to Britain, which they had this mandate to rule over, or to have control over and be responsible for. And that was officially approved by the League of Nations in 1922, and that's the front of the document. That was issued in December 1922, that was known as the Mandate for Palestine. And the Balfour Declaration that we were talking about was so important that it was actually included in that mandate, because that gave it the starting point that happened in 1917 when that declaration was first issued. So Palestine is now under the rule, as it were, of Britain, and they've mandated that they would control that area. So that was in effect from the September 1923. So it was in effect for about 12 months after the document was written. And that was then repealed on the 15th of May in 1948. And we're going to see why that was the case in a moment. So it lasted from 1923 through to 1948 when it was repealed. So we come back to our dot points that we were going through. So we've seen that the resurrection of the nation of Israel would be happening in stages. And as we've seen Theodore Herzl through to the British Empire, the Balfour Declaration, the British Mandate over Palestine. And then the last phrase that we needed to look at, or the last concept, was that they would come back to their own land. And that, of course, happened in May 1948, which is why that mandate was repealed in May 1948, because Israel actually became a nation again in May 1948. They would be back in their land. So let's have a look at what led up to May 1948. So what was happening at the time? So obviously the League of Nations was there. Sorry, I've got a picture on top of a picture there. So the League of Nations, which is what that picture at the back was about, was, as we said, was there to keep peace. But as we said, Germany resented being blamed for the World War One or for World War One, and particularly for the money they had to pay back. That was something they really struggled with. And so what happened is that tensions continued to simmer in the background in Europe, and what that led to was right-wing political parties. And they would be, meeting in rooms saying, we've got to get rid of the burden that's been placed on us by these other nations, and we want to stand upon our own 2 feet. And what that led to, of course, was the rise of what we know as the National Socialist Workers' Party. And that's a picture of them there on the screen. And of course, we know that they resulted in what we now know as the Nazi Party. And obviously, with them rising up and having an influence in the German or in Germany, that young man by the name of course, Adolf Hitler came to lead that party, and as a result, World War II resulted from that. So during that time leading up to World War II, in the 1920s and 30s, there was continual fighting in Palestine between the Arabs and the Jews. Obviously, the Arab nations that already had people living in Palestine weren't happy with the Jews being given particularly with Britain being given that mandate, and the Jews slowly trickling back into the land. So there was continual fighting and unrest in Palestine, and Britain attempted to juggle, those two opposing entities in Palestine. It turns out that Britain, the problem was that Britain promised the land to both the Arabs and the Jews. So while the Balfour Declaration was in existence, they'd made a similar promise to the Arabs, and that was came out later on. And of course, once that happens, you're going to always have animosity existing. So, of course, we know what happened with World War II and the dreadful situation of the Holocaust, and what that did to the Jewish people. But what that did was drive on the need to find a homeland for the Jewish people. It was obviously now felt on an international level that there needed to be some resolution to the situation for the Jewish people. If they're going to be persecuted for wherever they lived, then they need their own land to live in. And so Britain was the nation that really took control of that issue. And so they took the situation to the United Nations, as they're now known, and they took a proposition to the United Nations that Israel would become a nation once again. And so in May 1948, there was a vote to partition the land of Palestine, to give a portion of it to the nation of Israel, and for the United Nations to formally recognise the nation of Israel, and there would be a portion of the land given to what we now know as the Palestinian people that were already living in the land. So May 1948, that vote was taken, and of course that vote passed. And as a result, on the 14th of May 1948, Israel, the nation of Israel, was reborn. They were resurrected. The prophecy in Ezekiel chapter 37 was coming to fulfillment. The specific details in that prophecy were being fulfilled. So 1948, as I said, for many of us watching tonight, or some of us, they will remember 1948. I know my parents certainly do, and they certainly remember the state of excitement that happened at that time. So the state of Israel is born, and there's the front page from the Palestinian Post on May the 14th, 1948. And as we said earlier on, of course, the 15th of May 1948, the British Mandate was repealed. But the 15th of May 1948, the Arabs, Egypt and Syria all invaded Israel. And so there was a huge war as a result of that of that vote being taken and being passed. Israel was obviously able to withstand those invasions, and they were able to defeat the Arabs, Egypt and Syria, even though they were invading at that time. And this little fledgling nation was able to defend themselves. And obviously, as Bible students, we know that they were able to defend themselves because God said that they would be in the land of Israel again. God was very clear that nation of Israel would exist in their own land, as we see in Ezekiel chapter 37. So we come back to these words in Ezekiel 37, and we realise that actually these words have come to pass exactly how Ezekiel was told. Speak to these bones. These bones, although they're dry, they would have the breath put into them by God, and they would live. And those dry bones rose again and became that nation of Israel. And the prophecy there in Ezekiel chapter 37 is complete to the last word of that prophecy. And that's happened, as we said, in our lifetime, for those of us that remember those days. Not that long ago, in reality. So a prophecy that was given 2,500 years ago was fulfilled only less than 100 years ago. So an amazing prophecy given in Ezekiel chapter 37. So we said earlier on tonight that we wanted to look at two prophecies. So we've looked at Israel as a nation, and now we want to quickly have a look at Jerusalem, because when Israel took over or became a nation again, Jerusalem actually wasn't included. Jerusalem was a separate situation. So when we look at the city of Jerusalem, it's a city that I'm pretty sure most of us would recognize if we saw a picture like that. But when Israel was divided up and the British Mandate was repealed, and the nation of Israel was split into between the Jews and the Arabs, Jerusalem was not included. So Israel has a home in 1948, but it didn't include Jerusalem. The Jewish people had no control over Jerusalem at all. And I've just zoomed in on that map that I had on the screen, and you can see there that the yellow is the Jewish territories that they were given, and the green is the Arab territories. And you'll see that Jerusalem is a white section in the middle. And that section is actually was given to Britain to control. But the Jews always considered Jerusalem their home. And their national anthem actually concludes with the words that our hope is not yet lost. The hope that is 2,000 years old. And you think about those words in Ezekiel chapter 37. They actually would say our hope is lost. But once they became a nation again, they actually recognised that those words had come to fulfilment. Our hope is not yet lost. The hope that is 2,000 years old, to be a free nation in our land, the land of Zion, Jerusalem. And that was in their national anthem right from when they became a nation again. Jerusalem has always been considered by the Jewish people to be their spiritual home, that represents the Jewish people. So now what we need to do is, when we talk about Jerusalem, we want to actually now move into the New Testament and have a look at some verses concerning the prophecy that Jesus gave concerning Jerusalem, because this is where it starts to impact us as we started this evening. So we want to come over to Luke chapter 21, and we want to have a look at a few verses here. So in Luke chapter 21, verses 5 and 6, we've got Jesus talking about the temple, and that's an artist's representation of what the temple at the time of Jesus probably looked like from archaeological digs and what they've found. And it says in verse 5 that some spoke about the temple, how that it was adorned with goodly stones and gifts. So the temple would have been an amazing building at the time of the Lord Jesus Christ. And they're talking about how great it was. But Jesus says in verse 6 of Luke chapter 21, he says, as for these things, talking about the temple, which ye behold, the days come in which there shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. So talking about the temple, Jesus says, well, actually, this temple that you're looking at and you're admiring is actually going to be destroyed. It's going to be pulled down stone by stone. And of course, the disciples and those that are there want to know what he's talking about. When's this going to happen? And so he goes on later in the chapter in verse 20. And he says, when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, know that the desolation thereof is nigh. And that, of course, was fulfilled, as we've already indicated tonight, in AD 70. So 40 years later, approximately, the Roman armies came down against Jerusalem, and there's a relief from some archaeological findings of the Roman Empire coming down, destroying the Jerusalem and particularly the temple. And there they are carrying some of those Jewish artifacts away from Jerusalem, probably back to Rome, as part of their victory celebrations. So Jesus says this is what's going to happen. When Jerusalem's compassed with armies, you know that the desolation is going to happen. And he says in verse 24 that they shall fall by the edge of the sword. They shall be led away captive into all nations. Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So Jesus says that in effect, Israel is going to be dead, which is what Ezekiel chapter 37 was telling us. And he's saying that Jerusalem would be conquered. But he also says that there's a time when that period would end. He gives until the Gentiles, until the non-Jews who occupy Jerusalem, until their times are fulfilled. So he says there's going to become a time when Jerusalem will no longer be controlled by the Gentile people, but rather it'll go back into Jewish hands. And that's exactly what happened. So when we look back, a brief summary of what was happening once again, May 1948, as we said, Jerusalem was not part of the partition. They were governed by a special international regime that, of course, was headed up by Britain. In 1950, Jordan annexes lands that they captured in the 1948 war. Even though they were defeated, they still captured land, including eastern Jerusalem and what we now know as the West Bank. So the West Bank's always been a subject of great debate, obviously. But Jordan captured East Jerusalem. So the Jews didn't have control over Jerusalem. They actually captured Western Jerusalem, but not East Jerusalem. And so after 1950, there was conflicts on and off all the time, including in 1956, the Suez War, which of course resulted in the Suez Canal being shut down. Until in June 1967, full-scale war erupts, and what became known as the Six-Day War began. And Israel was able to once again defeat Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, the nations that invaded them at that time. And not only did they defeat them, they actually captured more land than what they had. So they captured the West Bank back off Jordan. They actually captured the Gaza Strip, which once again we know is the subject of much debate. They captured the Golan Heights, and they captured all of Jerusalem. So once again, in 1967, Jerusalem is back in control of Jewish people. Jews are now in control of Jerusalem once again, and hence we're able to see these iconic pictures of the Jewish people worshipping at the Wailing Wall, which is one of the foundation walls of that temple that was destroyed in AD 70. That's why it's such an important wall to the Jewish people. And so the prophecy of the Lord Jesus Christ comes to pass. Jerusalem has fallen back under Jewish control. The times of the Gentiles have been fulfilled. They're finished. Jesus' words are complete. That prophecy is fulfilled. The times of the Gentiles were ended, and Israel and Jerusalem back under Jewish control. But we're back to this question, aren't we? Why does this and how does this affect you and I today? Well, the answer to that is in this prophecy, because Jesus continues on. He doesn't stop at verse 24. He continues on. Let's come down and keep reading verses 25 and 26, where Jesus says there shall be signs in the sun, moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, which is what Andrew mentioned in his prayer tonight. Men's hearts failing them for fear, for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. So Jesus moves on straight from Jerusalem being captured by the Jews, and said the next significant event that's going to happen is the whole earth is going to be in distress. All nations are now going to have a time of distress. And it's not just distress, but it's perplexity. And this word perplexity means there is no way out, to be at a loss. So people are going to see situations happening upon the earth that they're actually going to look at and say, we don't know how to deal with this. We have no idea how to combat what's going on. And you may put, where we're at today into that category. Does mankind really have a way out of things like COVID-19? If COVID-19 was a little bit more aggressive, we would be in all sorts of real problems. Men's hearts would definitely be failing them for fear in that case. So we're getting towards verses 25 and verses 26 coming to fulfillment that the Lord Jesus Christ said would happen. So verses 25 and 26 couldn't have happened before Jerusalem was taken back by the Jewish people, because that's verse 24. These next verses happen after verse 24. Jerusalem had to be taken back by Israel before these events would happen. Men's hearts failing them for fear because they can't see a solution. And that's what we believe we're seeing in the world happening around us. But Jesus continues on. All is not lost. He actually says, when we get to that point, then verse 27, the very next verse, then they shall see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draws nigh. So Jesus says that Jerusalem's going to be captured once again by Israel. The nations then are going to fall into a state where all men are perplexed. Their hearts are failing them for fear. But then he says that's when the Son of Man, the hope of his prophecy, will actually come. And Jesus says things are going to change. But what does he mean when he says the Son of Man is going to come? What does that phrase mean? Well, Jesus is the Son of Man. There's many references to Jesus calling himself the Son of Man, particularly in the Gospel of Matthew. So Jesus is to come. Jesus is to return back to this earth. And Jesus says, when you see the earth in perplexity with no way out, then the Son of Man is coming. That's the time you need to look to see that Jesus is going to return to the earth. These were the words that were spoken to the disciples when Jesus ascended into heaven. It says in verse 10 that while that's Jesus' 12 disciples, or 11 disciples actually at the time, while they looked steadfastly toward heaven, as Jesus went up, behold, two men stood by them in white apparel, which also said, ye men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus, which is taken up from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner as ye have seen him go into heaven. Jesus went physically and bodily into heaven. He will return physically and bodily back to this earth when the days when men's hearts are failing them for fear come to pass upon the earth. Then we look, and Jesus says, look, because I'm coming, which is what Acts chapter 1 confirms for us. So we want to just quickly go through, well, how does this affect us? What is Jesus going to do when he returns? Well, the Apostle Paul tells us that he will set up God's kingdom. Verse 1 of chapter 4, verse 1, I charge you therefore before God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who shall judge the quick and the dead at his appearing and his kingdom. So he's going to appear back on this earth, and he's going to establish a kingdom upon this earth. And that's exactly what was promised at the time when he was born. These are words that we know come up at Christmas time. It's the angel speaking to Mary. And the angel says to Mary, who was the mother of Jesus, the angel says to Mary, don't fear, Mary, you have found favour with God. Behold, you shall conceive in your womb. You shall bring forth a son and shall call his name Jesus. He shall be great. He shall be the Son of the Highest. The Lord God shall give unto him the throne of his father David. So he will be king on the throne of his father David. He will be king in that kingdom that he's coming to establish. He will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end. That's the promise that's part of this prophecy concerning Jerusalem becoming the capital of Israel once again. Something that's happened in the lifetime of many more of us watching tonight. And this is where it becomes really exciting for you and me, because the Apostle Paul says that God has called us to be part of his kingdom. You should, and he says you should walk worthy of God who has called you unto his kingdom and his glory. God's called us. God's invited us to be part of his kingdom that's coming on this earth, the change that's going to happen in that kingdom of God that is coming. And obviously we don't have time. Time's certainly already gone, so we need to go through this a little bit quicker. We've got one passage that I want to just read out to you regarding the kingdom of God, and it's found in the Old Testament. The prophecy, once again, a prophecy about the kingdom, the Old Testament, chapter 4, beginning at verse 1. And think about this, it's the exact opposite to what we read in Luke chapter 1 of men's hearts failing them for fear, perplexity, dread, and all those things that are happening upon the earth. This is what Micah says in chapter 4. In the last days, and this is obviously the last days of the kingdoms of men, because Jesus is going to come and establish his kingdom. Well, it's going to happen in those last days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains. It shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow unto it. Many nations shall come. So those nations that were in distress now are going to say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us of his ways. We will walk in his paths, for the law shall go forth out of Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. So the prophecies that Lord Jesus Christ was just giving about Jerusalem, now this is what's happening with Jerusalem. Jesus is king in Jerusalem. That's where the throne of David is, that he'll sit on as king. Goes on in verse 3. He, this is the Lord Jesus Christ, will judge among many people. He will rebuke strong nations afar off. They shall beat their swords, so weapons of war, into plowshares, implements that you can grow food with. So you'll take your swords and beat them into plowshares, your spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they even learn war anymore. Obviously, there's now a time of peace, and the peace results in verse 4. But they shall sit, every man under his vine and under his fig tree. None shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken it. So remember the emphasis in Ezekiel 37 about God saying, I'm speaking this, I'm telling you that Israel is going to be resurrected. Well, we've got the same assurance that the mouth of the Lord has said, I'm going to set up a kingdom. It's going to be a one that's going to result in peace and safety, the opposite to what Luke chapter 21 said of distress and perplexity. Now there's peace and quietness. Every man being able to sit under his own vine and under his own fig tree, none making them afraid. The distress of Luke chapter 21 is gone. And we conclude with the words here in verse 5. All people will walk everyone in the name of his God. We will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. The exact opposite to Luke chapter 21. How do we get involved in this? How do we be part of this invitation? Well, Jesus tells us this in Mark chapter 16. He's talking to his disciples and he says, I want you to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He who believes and is baptized shall be saved. He who does not will be condemned. But he who believes that the kingdom of God is going to come, that God has invited him to be part of that kingdom, and is baptized, will be saved. So remember what Jesus said after Jerusalem was captured. Look, because your redemption is coming. You will be saved if we believe that that's what's going to happen. So belief and then baptism, being fully immersed in water as a symbol of our understanding and believing in the word of God, understanding in believing in Bible prophecy, that when God has promised that he will return his son back to this earth, we can put our faith and confidence in that because of all these other prophecies that have been fulfilled. We can have confidence that the prophecies that the Lord Jesus Christ says about him returning to this earth will be fulfilled as well. So thanks for listening tonight. I hope that's been of help to you.